I had a medical procedure, a rather remarkable thing. They were able to fix the mitral valve in my heart by going up through my leg. And while that was successful, they destroyed my throat. So I'm going to be a little hoarse tonight and not as animated because I'm still recovering. But at any rate, the heart procedure was successful. All right. Tonight we will have class 109. And while the logical sequence of the courses may seem a little jumbled to you, the ultimate outcome, I hope, will become clear within a class or two. And all those questions that I've given you for homework will be answered. And we've already seen that some of them are answered, but we'll answer some more of them. So let us go to the slides. I'll share my screen. And let me see if we can get this fixed here. Some fundamental verities about the cosmos, class 109. Now, I don't presume to be a cosmologist, and I don't presume to, even though we believe as Baha'is that there is a harmony between science and religion, meaning that they describe reality accurately, and therefore there is no conflict between them if they do so. That doesn't mean that I can give you a definitive statement about what the cosmos is like, derived solely from my readings of the writings. But so please be sure to understand that what I say is simply my understanding of the Baha'i writings, together with what little understanding I have of the science of cosmology and so forth. So we'll begin with going back to the questions again, and we're not going to go over them, but they're the same 15 questions. We may add some later, but within the next class or two, we'll start seeing that we've answered about half of them, and we will do that tonight. And so we will go over the questions perhaps the next class and see how many we've answered. So the first thing I wanted to share with you is a passage that Jim Ferguson shared with us in our Q&A last week. And so I copied it down because it's so important. We had already gone over the next slide about what is meant by a personal God. This is so important because while we're talking about the cosmos that God has created for his purpose, and his purpose, as we've said, we have discovered, is to create a being capable of knowing and worshiping him, but capable of knowing and worshiping and loving God of its own free will. And to create that situation, the methodology of having two dimensions will become apparent as we go through these axioms or verities about reality. So this is the passage that is from Gleanings that Jim found, and he was talking in particular about every act that we, well, let me just read it. Every act you meditate is as clear to him, to God, as is that act when already accomplished. There is none other God besides him. His is all creation and its empire. All stands revealed before him. All is recorded and is holy and in tablets. This foreknowledge of God, however, should not be regarded as having caused the actions of men, just as your own previous knowledge that a certain event is to occur, or your desire that it should happen, is not and never can be the reason for its occurrence. Now, what this is talking about is an old philosophical enigma, and that is, and it's not an enigma in many Protestant churches, particularly the Presbyterian Church, and this begins all the way back in the Puritan Revolution in England and with some of the earliest puritanical teachings, namely, God is all-knowing. Therefore, if God foreknows, must foreknow everything that will happen. Therefore, if he foreknows it, it cannot be otherwise. Therefore, he knows who will be saved. And if he knows who will be saved, either you have already been saved or you have not. And there's nothing you can do to alter that. And you'd think that would make people very cynical and rather oblivious of trying to be to change themselves, because well, if I'm saved, I'm okay. If I'm not, there's nothing I do about it, so I'll just go raise hell. Not so. The Puritan movement, as we know from the Puritans that came to this country, were very staunch, very rigid, very bound by their rules and regulations. And the reason for that, very simply, is they also believed that the ones who would save would reveal that state according to their obedience. So you, of course, wanted to be considered as being among the saved. So it's kind of mixed up theology or philosophy. But that's what Baha'u'llah is getting at here, is that foreknowledge does not mean foreordination. So you can foreknow something, but that doesn't mean your foreknowledge is causative. Example I used to use when talking about this was if you're on top of a building and you see an intersection and two cars at a blind intersection heading 60 miles at the same point, you foreknow they're going to crash. It's inevitable, but you're not having any effect on that. So this is a very important statement about God as a personal God and God as having foreknowledge. But the particular reason I included is because the idea of God as being beyond anything we can understand does not mean he is not aware of or concerned with individuals. Now, of course, we're used to our relationship to God being through the manifestation, so we establish a most intimate relationship with the manifestation who brings us to God. One thing I thought about, and I don't know the answer to it, is that we know in a passage we read last class that Baha'u'llah, once released from his earthly form, could, as Abdu'l-Baha stated, take care of the cause in a way he couldn't do beforehand, which also means, of course, he's looking out for us individually. So it occurred to me, well, maybe each manifestation is, even though the manifestation for this day is looking after all the people in this day, it made me wonder if perhaps Christ in his spiritual station is helping those who are still following him, and Muhammad doing the same for the faithful among his followers. Just a thought. I don't know there's anything in the writings that responds to that. And it doesn't matter, because we know that ultimately God is looking after us, and his manifestations are the most important intermediary for us. And this is the other statement that we've seen before. What is meant by a person, this is from Shoghi Effendi, what is meant by a personal God is a God who is conscious of his creation, who has a mind, a will, a purpose, and not, as many scientists and materialists believe, an unconscious and determined force operating in the universe. In other words, God is not simply the confluence or the accumulation of all the various forces that make the universe work. God is an actual being with consciousness, with will, with a purpose. And of course, that's what we're getting at, is how does God's purpose bring about all that is, and in the particular way that it is. Now, one of the first verities or postulates or axioms, whatever term you want to use, is that God has no beginning. So we begin here with this point. if there was a time when God did not manifest his qualities, then there was no God, because the attributes of God presuppose the creation of phenomenon. For example, by present consideration, we can say that God is the creator. Then there must have always been a creation, since the quality of the creator cannot be limited to the moment when some man or men realize this attribute. Now, this is very important. This is saying, and you can say it in the converse of this too, which is, if there is a creation, then the creator must have existed. But you can also say the converse, which is, since God has always existed, then creation must always existed. And we go further, as we'll see in reading these passages, that if creation has always existed and this earth has not always existed, then there must have been other planets on which there was human life. And by human, we mean, again, those beings that are capable of recognizing God and emulating those qualities of God in preparation for transition to the spiritual realm. The greatest, I'm going to the second paragraph here, the greatest bounties of God in this phenomenal world are his manifestations. This is the greatest postulate. These manifestations are the sons of reality, for it is through the manifestation that the reality becomes known and established for man. So this is another verity. So we have God exists, God wants to be known, therefore God brings about creation, and the ultimate purpose of that creation is a being, a human being. The definition of a human being is a being capable of knowing and loving God. And this process needs a teacher. Otherwise, we would be directionless. Therefore, as it says on down here, there is no cessation whatsoever in the future for the appearance of the manifestation of God, because God is infinite and his purpose cannot be limited in any way. If we ever dare to limit and circumscribe God's purpose within any bounds, then of necessity we have dared to set limits to the omnipotence of God. The created has dared to define the creator. Another thing you're going to notice here as we go through these slides is a lot of what is said is by Abdu'l-Baha. And of course, Baha'u'llah was very careful to note whenever he was writing a letter to authorities and the religious rulers and so on, that he studied in no school, nor did anyone mentor him. And we may wonder, why does he keep saying that? He keeps saying it because how does he know what he knows without having had any influence from any other source? And the answer has to be, it is a mystery. It is from God. The same thing is true with Abdu'l-Baha. He never was able to visit a library. I mean, he may have visited one in his trip to the West, but his talks and his he had never given a public talk before he was released from prison, and yet his talks are just eloquent as they can be, incredibly well structured, and each is geared towards the audience that he's speaking to. But also he alludes to all kinds of theories about reality. Where does he get this from? Well, the answer must be that he has the mystery of God, capable of knowing whatever he needs to know. So what are the axioms? God's desire to be known requires a being with free will, because true knowledge and love must be bilateral. For such a being to have this opportunity to discover God and love God independently requires an indirect teaching methodology. That is, if you impose knowledge on someone, simply tell them what to think, then they really haven't learned anything. They're simply parroting what you have told them. And any good teacher knows this. Any good parent knows this. that if you are oppressive as a parent and trying to teach your children virtue or whatever, then that's not going to have a long-term effect. You have to teach them to acquire these virtues themselves. They need to be led. Such a methodology requires a classroom where the true reality, the answers, are veiled, or at least symbolized or metaphorized. Because if the answers were obvious, then it would require no effort. To assist the being in this quest, a teacher must appear who is also subtle and direct, not dogmatic or obvious. I give an example in some of my writing about the fact that why don't the manifestations say that the next manifestation will appear in Mecca? This would be Christ speaking. His name will be Muhammad, and you will find him at this place. Why didn't the prophets beforehand, why were they so symbolic in alluding to the appearance of Christ as a king on the throne of David when he was, of course, a carpenter's son to all appearances? And the answer is, if you said, well, Jesus will appear, he will be born in Nazareth, and he will be at this place at this time, who would show up? Certainly not those who were spiritually attuned to this guidance, but just those who were curious. Furthermore, they probably, once they saw that he had nothing spectacular about his person, other than being a perfect manifestation of spiritual virtue, most would just turn away and so on. It's something to meditate on. We'll get to it more in another class. The purpose of this instruction is development of the human being and preparation for transition to the realm of the spirit. And we've come across a passage before in another class where we read that this is the purpose of the appearance of the manifestations, to prepare us for that transition. Since the Creator has no beginning, neither is his desire to be known and worshipped. If this is his reason for bringing about creation, it has always been his reason. He didn't suddenly, and as I've said this before, he didn't suddenly think, well, I have a great idea. I'd like to be known and worshipped. No, if it's a good idea, it's always been a good idea, and it has always been his idea. And if it's always been his idea, then it has always come about. So you can, as I've said before in previous classes, you can say there is a point in causality where this occurs, but there is not a point in time where it occurs. And that's where we go to the arcs of descent and ascent. If physical reality is a strategic part of the methodology for fulfilling this wish, then physical reality must also always have existed. Therefore, while a planetary system is a God particle, and I use that term borrowed from science, of course, in other words, the smallest unit in which human beings can be brought into existence, a planetary system, of the overall system may have a beginning, a process of fulfilling its purpose and an end. The system as a whole has always been in existence, has always brought forth planetary systems. So we cannot say, even though we can say, we can guess, even though our guesses are changing as we discover more, that planet Earth has a beginning, or the solar system has a beginning. There has always been a planetary system with human life. It could not be otherwise. If our axioms are correct, since the manifestation are the principal means by which the educational process on a planet is initiated, continued, and fulfilled, then manifestations must also always have existed, even as the writings state that the manifestation existed prior to the creation of heaven and earth. While planetary unity is the most advanced stage of advancement in this teaching methodology, the one we're in now, that's our goal, there must necessarily be the possibility, and the Guardian alludes to this, that should be greater expressions of this unity, since the entirety of creation is itself one unified expression of God's desire and God's methodology for achieving that plan. We can imagine then that there must be interplanetary expressions of this unity. And because our present understanding of those subsystems, and by subsystems I mean within the cosmos or the universe, thus far consists of solar systems, galactic clusters, and probably beyond that, but that's the furthest we've gotten so far. We cannot impose limits on how vast that unity might become. And yet there will never be an end to that unity. In other words, there'll never be a point where the whole creation has achieved its purpose and God will start over or be satisfied and end it all. And in this sense, the spiritual world is likened to the phenomenal world. They are the exact counterpart of each other. Now, I've read this several times before, because it means not only do you need both dimensions to bring about this plan, but particularly the teaching classroom of the physical dimension must emulate in every way, in every important way, the spiritual world, even though its spiritual attributes are concealed until the manifestation helps us see them and understand them. So God has us appear in different colors, in different cultures, so that we may understand that beyond these ostensible differences is a spiritual unity that transcends these differences. And of course, we see that in ecology, we see that in the animal world, and so on, that they are able to transcend their differences. This is stating what we've already stated, but it's nice to have an authoritative statement. God is eternal and ancient, not a new God. His sovereignty is of old, not recent, not merely existent these 5,000 or 6,000 years. This infinite universe is from everlasting. The sovereignty, now this is important, the infinite universe is everlasting. Now this means two things that seem to contradict what most cosmologists have been saying, though many are changing their minds, that the universe is not infinite, that it is contained, that it sprang from a big bang, from a singularity to diverse parts and subsystems. The Baha'i writings say the universe is infinite and from everlasting. It's always existed. The sovereignty, power, names, and attributes of God are eternal, ancient. His names presuppose creation and predicate his existence and will. We say God is creator. This name creator appears when we connote creation. We say God is the provider. This name presupposes and proves the existence of the provided. This argument that Abdu'l-Baha is using here, he uses in many other and states it more in a more sophisticated language, for example, as we'll see in a quote later from his tablet to Auguste Forel. So he has this argument both insofar as the first cause argument, and he also has it in this, which contains the indication of a first cause argument. Physical reality is therefore without beginning or end. The spirit of man has a beginning, but it has no end. And that's talking about our soul. So our soul begins when it emanates from the realm of the spirit and associates with our body, but it then has no ending. It continues eternally. In the same way, the species existing on this earth are phenomenal, for it is established that there was a time when these species did not exist on the surface of the earth. Now we're getting into the question of evolution. Is there evolution? Well, obviously there must be, because at one point There weren't humans. Now they are. Where did they come from? They had to come from the material that's on the earth. Moreover, the earth has not always existed, but the world of existence has always been, for the universe is not limited to this terrestrial globe. Again, repeating what we've already said, but you can state it in many different ways, and each time you get a sort of different viewpoint of the same truth. Humans have always existed. Again, I've already said that, but here it is stated in a different way. If man did not exist, the universe would be without result, for the purpose of existence is the revelation of the divine perfections. We cannot say, then, that there was a time when man was not. At most, we can say that there was a time when this earth did not exist, and that at the beginning, man was not present upon it. Very important there. So another important truth that is stated here is that the universe is created, the physical universe is created not only to emulate the spiritual dimension, but to manifest the divine perfections. So that's the purpose of the physical reality, is a place where the divine perfections are demonstrated in physical ways. The spirit of man has a beginning, but it has no end. It continues internally. Let's see, I've already read that one, haven't I? The universe is an integrated system. This is extremely important, and that is, if we think of infinity, we might think of chaos. How can something be infinite? Period. How can it be infinite? And if it is infinite, how can it have structure? Well, of course, math is, for most scientists and scholars, the most pure language to discuss reality. And so you can say, is there a possibility for infinity numerically? And of course there is. All you've got to do is keep adding one, and you no way that you need to stop. You can go on eternally. And yet, can it be structured? Well, why can it be? So in other words, what troubles, I think, more emotionally than logically, the cosmologist and the astrophysicist and so on, is that they can't grasp something that is infinite and yet structured, that it has to come from somewhere. My theory that I'm trying to get at here, and that I think the writings are getting at, but this is, again, solely my understanding, is that the universe can be infinite and always have been infinite and still have structure and purpose and subsystems that are not infinite. As to spiritual influences, now this is Abdu'l-Baha dealing with, is there any truth to astrology? But even though he's denouncing, if you will, the validity of astrology, he is saying, but of course there are influences from stars and so forth. Everything influences everything in reality. And of course, this is Newtonian physics as well as Einstein physics. As to spiritual influences, although it might seem strange that these stars should exert a spiritual influence upon the human world, yet were you to reflect deeply upon this matter, you would not be greatly surprised by it. My meaning, however, is not that the deductions that the astrologers of old made from the motions of the stars and planets were true, for these were mere figments of the imagination which had their origin with the Egyptian, Assyrian, and Chaldean priests, or rather stem from the idle conjectures of the Hindus and the superstitions of the Greeks, the Romans, and other star worshippers. But I mean that this limitless universe is like the human body, all the members of which are connected and linked with one another, with the greatest strength, how much the organs, the members, and the parts of the body of man are intermingled and connected for the mutual aid and help, and how much they influence one another. In this same way, the parts of this infinite universe have their members and elements connected with one another and influence one another spiritually and materially. And of course, he's talking about something here that's far beyond what we can comprehend with our present knowledge. He gets into it more subtly and more intricately in an as yet unauthorized work called the Commentary on the the Commentary on the Hidden Treasure, I was going to say, but actually the Loya Flaki, the Tablet of the Universe, which has been well translated by Mujan Momin and is available, but it's not authoritatively translated, and it would have to be because to be particularly helpful, because while there are some very obvious things he says that are tremendously important by way of establishing physical laws of the universe, it's very subtle and very abstruse and difficult in some places, particularly where he talks about what would seem to be something that we will talk about later, about his mentioning of the ether. And he doesn't use the word ether in that particular work, but he does in other places. Abdu'l-Baha does. And this is something we'll get to when we talk about the Michelson-Morley light experiment, where they seem to disprove the existence of an ether. What does that matter? And we'll explain why when we get to that discussion. It won't be in this class. So just to throw, three of the multitude of theories existent among the scientists today of the cosmos. There's the hot Big Bang theory, and that is that there was a singularity from which there was a sudden explosion of either what energy or whatever caused it to expand, from which all materiality sprang into being and is still expanding. And so you have a universe that is still expanding from that initial Big Bang. But then you have the question, so where was the singularity? It had to exist in something. And so you have a problem right there. If the universe is not infinite, then it must have been circumscribed, but it must have existed in something. And another question I like to put to this theory is, say we're at the very edge of this expanding singularity, to what the astronomers with their the James Webb telescope and so on say we're looking at, in some cases, the radiation background at the very edge of the beginning of our universe. So let's do an Einstein kind of mind game or mind experiment. Let's say we're at the very edge of that expanding universe, and we stick our hand out ahead of us. What are we sticking our hand into? I don't know if that's clear, but in other words, it's expanding, but into what is it expanding? So the idea that the cosmos could be contained implies it's contained in a container, in something bigger than it is. Then we get to a similar term, the idea of multiverses, which is very popular among some, many universes. Well, this is, I say, oxymoronic, meaning it's self-contradictory if you are using the term correctly, because universe means all that exists in reality. And it's illogical because if the universe is everything that is, then you can talk about subsystems, and that's really what's being referred to. You can have solar systems, you can have galaxies, you can have galaxy clusters, and so on. But the idea of a multiverse is a self-contradictory term in terms of a universe. Well, the last one is one I was just saying. If it is not infinite, if contained or circumscribed and not infinite, contained in what? Something larger than not the universe, but a subset, then it's not the universe. So the term universe, from a Baha'i point of view, means everything that exists in material dimension of reality. Now, when I talk about reality as the title for this book that may at some time get written, The Mind of God and the Structure of Reality, I'm not confining myself to the physical dimension. I'm talking about, why did God create spiritual reality? So he creates two dimensions in reality. So from a Baha'i point of view, we're not confining our description of reality to the physical cosmos, but the way it mirrors an exact replication in symbolic or metaphorical form, the spiritual realm. This infinite universe is from everlasting. The sovereignty, power, names, and attributes of God are eternal, ancient. His names presuppose creation and predicate his existence and will. Now, we've already read this one, so I won't read it again. But again, I emphasize this last part that I've highlighted. There were always creatures and subjects that existed and provided for. And he goes on to say, and this is from selections from the writings, about the integration of it. It would be even as a madman. In other words, if there were, and again, you notice the terms he used, endless universe. So it's hard to interpret that as meaning anything other than infinite. But if there were no director or coordinator, the universe would be flawed and deficient. It would be even as a madman, whereas you can see that this endless creation carrieth out its function in perfect order, every separate part of it performing its own task with complete reliability, nor is there any flaw to be found in all its workings. Thus it is clear that a universal power existed, directing and regulating this infinite universe. Every rational mind can grasp this fact. Well, apparently every rational mind cannot grasp this fact. So on the one hand, we don't want to be braggarts and say, look, as Baha'is, we know all the stuff that the scientists don't know. We know only just a little bit of what we know. And even as the scientists are finding out, the same is true for them. And what we know is that in the end result, both are describing the same reality through different lenses. So we don't want to disdain science, but we don't want, neither do we want to ignore the incontrovertible deductions we can make from these writings, which if they just said once, in other words, you don't want to take a passage out of the writings, separate it from everything else in the writings and say, this is the truth. No, you have to read all of them and find out, well, maybe this statement about this endless universe could be read some other way, and so on. Furthermore, although all created things grow and develop, yet are they subject to influences from without. For instance, the sun giveth heat, the rain nourisheth, the wind bringeth life, so that man can develop and grow. Thus it is clear that the human body is under influences from the outside, and that without those influences man could not grow. And likewise, those outside influences are subject to other influences in their turn, ad infinitum, all right, until you get to God himself, the ultimate influencer. And this is from his tablet to Auguste Forel. And again, the language in this is much more sophisticated. And you wonder how Abdu'l-Baha could know all this, so much as to impress a man of science like Forel, or a philosopher. And the fact is, because he knew whatever he needed to know. All divine philosophers and men in wisdom and understanding, when observing these endless beings, have considered that in this great and infinite universe, all things end in the material kingdom, that the outcome of the material kingdom is the vegetable kingdom, the outcome of the vegetable kingdom is the animal kingdom, and the outcome of the animal kingdom is the world of man. The consummation of this limitless universe, with all its grandeur and glory, hath been man himself, who in this world of being toileth and suffereth for a time with diverse ills and pains, and ultimately disintegrates, leaving no trace and no fruit after him. Were it so, were this all there is no doubt that this infinite universe, with all its perfections, has ended in sham and delusion, with no result, no fruit, no permanence, and no effect. It would be utterly without meaning. Thus the divinity of God, which is the totality of all perfection, reveals itself in the reality of man. That is, the divine essence is the sum total of all perfections. And from this station, it casts a ray of its splendor upon the human reality. In other words, the sun of truth is reflected in this mirror. Thus, man is a perfect mirror facing the sun of truth, and is the seat of its reflection. The splendor of all the divine perfections is manifest in the reality of man, and it is for this reason that he is the vicegerent or vice-regent and the apostle of God. If man did not exist, the universe would be without result. For the purpose of existence is the revelation of the divine perfections. We cannot say then that there was a time when man was not. And here we go back to the same part of this quote we had earlier. At most, we can say that there was a time when this earth did not exist, and that at the beginning man was not present upon it. All right. Well, that should give you some food for thought if you'll go over these slides and review the very important verities that Abdu'l-Baha and Baha'u'llah have revealed for us to give us understanding of what reality is about.